It was a quiet Thursday evening when Lila finished her last piano lesson of the day. The small classroom she taught in was filled with the faint smell of old wood and chalk dust, and the soft echoes of her students' laughter still hung in the air. She leaned back on the worn bench, stretching her fingers that had danced across piano keys all day. Teaching children music was something she loved deeply, even if it barely paid her bills. She had been living in a tiny rented apartment above a bakery for the past 2 years, saving every extra coin to fix her old piano at home. Just as she was about to lock up and head home, her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before answering. A warm, polite voice came through the other end, a woman introducing herself as Clara, a nurse from the Maplewood nursing home on the edge of town. Clara explained that one of their residents, an elderly man, used to be a pianist many years ago. He hadn't spoken much recently, but earlier that day, he had murmured something about wanting to hear a simple piano melody again. The staff didn't have anyone who could play, so they had asked around and gotten Lila's name through one of her students' families. Lila listened quietly, unsure what to say. She was tired, and the thought of going out again after work made her want to crawl into bed. But there was something in the nurse's voice and a mix of hope and worry that made her pause. "He just wants to hear a song," Clara said softly. "Something simple. It would mean a lot to him." After a short silence, Lila found herself agreeing. "I'll come by this evening," she said, even though she wasn't sure why she was saying it. Maybe it was because she couldn't stand the thought of someone wanting music and not being able to hear it. She packed her small keyboard, the same one she carried for her lessons, wrapped it in a cloth, and stepped out into the chilly night. The streets were quiet and the smell of rain filled the air. The nursing home was only a 20-minute walk away, a tall brick building with warm lights glowing through its windows. When she entered, a sense of stillness surrounded her. Not sadness, but a kind of peace that comes from the slow rhythm of old lives. Clara greeted her with a kind smile, her eyes tired but gentle. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading Lila down a narrow hallway lined with family photos and old paintings. The faint sound of a television came from one of the rooms, mixed with soft murmurs of conversation. They stopped outside a room near the end of the hall. "His name is Mr. Alden," Clara whispered. "He doesn't talk much. Just play something soft. He likes calm music." Lila nodded, her hands tightening on the keyboard case. When she stepped inside, the first thing she noticed was the large window facing the garden. The old man sat near it, wrapped in a wool blanket. His thin fingers rested on the arm of the chair, and his eyes were fixed on the trees outside. He didn't turn when she entered. "Good evening," Lila said quietly. "I'm Lila. I came to play a little music for you." There was no answer, just the slow rise and fall of his chest. She set up the keyboard on the small table and plugged it into a nearby socket. As she sat down, she studied him for a moment. His face was lined with age, his hair silver white, but there was a grace in his posture, like someone who had once been strong and sure. She could almost imagine him sitting at a grand piano long ago, surrounded by an audience that admired him. She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes were soft, like whispers in the air. She played a simple tune, something she used to play for her students, gentle and steady, full of warmth. The sound filled the small room, flowing into the corners where silence had lived for too long. At first, there was no reaction, but as she continued, she saw a small change. Mr. Alden's fingers began to move slightly, tracing invisible notes in the air. His eyes blinked slowly, and a tear formed at the corner of one. Lila kept playing, her heart suddenly heavy and light at the same time. When the melody ended, the room was silent again. She waited, unsure whether to speak or leave quietly. Then she heard it, a faint whisper. "Beautiful." His voice was rough, but the word carried emotion that made her chest tighten. She smiled gently. "I'm glad you liked it," she said. Mr. Alden turned his head slightly toward her. His eyes, though tired, had a spark in them now, a soft glow of memory. "My wife," he murmured, "used to play that song." Lila didn't know what to say. She nodded quietly and replied, "It's a lovely melody. I can come again if you'd like." He didn't respond, but she noticed the faintest curve of a smile on his lips. It was enough for her to understand. When she packed up her keyboard, Clara appeared by the door. Her eyes were wide with surprise. "He spoke," she whispered. "He hasn't said a word in months." Lila felt something shift inside her. It wasn't pride or joy, just a deep, humble warmth. Maybe he just needed music, she said softly. Outside, the night had grown colder. The wind carried the smell of rain-soaked earth as she walked home. The town's lights reflected on the wet pavement, and she thought about the man's eyes, how they had changed when the melody began. She wondered how many memories were hidden behind that silence, how much love and loss lived in those quiet walls. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about the nursing home. She went about her work, teaching children scales, correcting finger placement, laughing at their clumsy mistakes. But somewhere in the back of her mind, the image of the old man by the window stayed with her. On Friday evening, she called Clara. "If it's okay," she said, "I'd like to come again." Clara's voice was full of gratitude. "He's been asking about you," she said softly. "He doesn't say much, but he hums that same tune every morning now." That evening, Lila packed her keyboard again and walked the same path to Maplewood. This time she felt no hesitation. When she entered Mr. Alden's room, his eyes lit up faintly. Not a big reaction, but enough to show he remembered her. She smiled and set up her keyboard near the window again. "What should I play today?" she asked gently, even though she knew he might not answer. After a moment, he raised a shaky finger and pointed toward the keyboard. "The same one," he whispered. She smiled. Of course. As she began to play, the same soft melody filled the air again. But this time, something felt different. Mr. Alden closed his eyes, his lips moving silently as if he were remembering words to a song only he could hear. When she reached the final note, he opened his eyes and looked at her for a long time. "Thank you," he said slowly. Lila nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't just a thank you for the music. It felt like something deeper, something that reached beyond the moment. From then on, her visits became a quiet ritual. Every Friday evening, she would arrive at the nursing home, and Mr. Alden would be waiting by the window. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. She would play and he would listen. Other times, he would tell her small fragments of his life. How he used to play piano in a small jazz bar, how his wife loved to dance to his music, how they had once dreamed of traveling the world but never got the chance. Each story came in pieces like bits of a puzzle. Lila listened carefully, never interrupting. She realized that his words weren't just stories. They were memories he had been holding on to, afraid to lose. One evening, after she finished playing, Mr. Alden asked, "Why do you come here, dear?" "They don't pay you, do they?" Lila smiled. "No, I just like being here. It feels peaceful." He studied her face for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You remind me of her," he said softly. She had the same kindness in her hands when she played. Lila looked down at the keys, unsure how to respond. She simply said, "I'm honored." When she left that night, the stars were bright above the quiet town. The streets shimmered under the streetlights, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a strange sense of purpose. It wasn't about money or recognition. It was about something pure. The idea that a small act, like playing a song for someone forgotten by the world, could mean everything to them. That thought stayed with her as she walked home, her fingers still tingling from the keys, her heart full in a way she couldn't explain. She didn't know it yet, but that simple visit, that single melody, was the beginning of something that would change her life forever. She would later think back to that night, the soft sound of rain, the old man's fragile voice, the trembling gratitude in his eyes, and realize that sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that shape our destinies. For now, though, she simply smiled as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, whispering to herself, "I'll go again next week." And she did. Without knowing, each time she pressed a key and each time he smiled, a quiet thread was being woven between two lives, one nearing its sunset, and one just beginning to shine. The following Friday, Lila finished her last class a little earlier than usual. Her students had been restless that day, excited about the upcoming weekend, and she could barely keep their small hands on the keys. But even as they stumbled through the notes, her mind kept drifting back to the quiet room at Maplewood Nursing Home. She had been thinking about Mr. Alden all week, the way his eyes had softened when she played, the way his trembling fingers had brushed against the air like he was touching invisible piano keys. When she locked up her classroom that evening, the sun was already dipping low, painting the sky with soft orange and pink. She picked up her keyboard and started walking toward the nursing home. The streets were quiet, lined with shops closing for the night. As she walked past the bakery near her apartment, the smell of freshly baked bread followed her, warm and comforting. For some reason, she felt a sense of anticipation, as if she was on her way to meet an old friend. At the nursing home, the familiar nurse, Clara, greeted her with a wide smile. "He's been waiting for you," she said. "He asked 3 times today if the music girl was coming." Lila laughed softly at the name. It touched her heart to know that he remembered her, even in his fragile state. When she entered his room, the lights were dim, and a soft glow from the setting sun filled the space. Mr. Alden was sitting in his chair near the window again, wearing a thick cardigan that looked far too big for his thin frame. His eyes were fixed outside, but when he heard her footsteps, he turned his head slowly. "You came back," he said in a quiet voice, as if he didn't fully believe it himself. "Of course," Lila replied with a gentle smile. "I told you I would." She set up her keyboard in the same corner as before. The soft click of the stand echoed faintly. As she plugged it in, she glanced toward him. "What should I play today?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window for a moment, his face lost in thought. Then he said, "I play something gentle, something that sounds like rain." Lila thought for a second, then placed her fingers on the keys and began a slow, tender tune that drifted like falling raindrops. Each note seemed to fill the air with a kind of stillness, not silence, but calm. Mr. Alden closed his eyes, and for a while, he looked peaceful, almost young again. His breathing matched the rhythm of the music, steady and soft. When the last note faded, he opened his eyes and whispered, "My wife used to play something like that when she was cooking dinner. The window would be open, and the rain would be falling. She said music made the world feel less lonely." Lila smiled but said nothing. She didn't want to interrupt the memory forming in his mind. She could feel it. The way music wasn't just sound to him. It was a bridge to another time. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the hum of the heater and the faint creaks of the old wooden floor. Then Mr. Alden looked at her and asked, "Why do you play the piano?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, her fingers resting on the keys. "Because it makes me feel alive," she said finally. "When I play, it's like I can say things that words can't. I grew up in a small town with not much to do. My mother used to play an old upright piano we had in the living room. When she passed away, I kept playing to feel close to her." He nodded slowly. "Ah," he said. "That's how it starts for most of us. We play to hold on to something, or someone." Lila looked at him, surprised by the quiet wisdom in his tone. "Did you always play?" she asked. He chuckled faintly, a sound both fragile and full of warmth. "Always, since I was a boy. My father wanted me to be a banker, but I had no love for numbers. The piano was my only home. I met my wife because of it. She was a singer. We performed together for many years. Small stages, local gatherings, nothing grand, but it was enough for us." He stopped for a moment, his gaze drifting again toward the window. "After she passed, I stopped playing. The keys felt heavy. The silence felt easier." Lila's heart tightened. She could see it, the weight of loss that had silenced not just his music, but his voice too. She wanted to say something comforting, but instead she said softly, "Maybe you should try again. Even just one note," he smiled faintly, shaking his head. "My hands aren't what they used to be. They tremble now, but when you play, I can almost remember what it felt like." Lila didn't push further. She just nodded and began another song, a simple one this time, one her youngest students liked to play. She noticed how his face relaxed again, how his fingers twitched slightly with the rhythm. For the next few weeks, their visits became a gentle routine. Every Friday, she would walk through the quiet town, carrying her keyboard and a thermos of tea for herself and a small box of cookies she would share with Clara afterward. Sometimes Mr. Alden would talk while she set up, little bits of stories from his past. Other times he would just listen, lost in his own thoughts. One evening, when she arrived, Clara told her something that made her pause. "He's been asking if you can teach him again," she said with a smile. "He said he wants to feel the keys, even if just once more." That evening, when Lila entered his room, she noticed something new. The staff had placed a small electronic keyboard near his chair. Mr. Alden looked at it nervously, like it was an old friend he wasn't sure how to face. "I don't know if I can still do this," he said softly. "Let's just try," Lila said, pulling up a chair beside him. She turned the keyboard on and placed his hands gently on the keys. His fingers trembled, but the moment his skin touched the plastic keys, something changed in his expression. "Let's start simple," she said. "Just press this one." She guided his index finger to a middle C. A single, pure note filled the air. He looked at her, surprised. "That felt different," he whispered. Lila smiled. "That's music. Even one note can make the world feel alive again." They spent the next half hour playing just simple scales. His hands were unsteady, his timing off, but every sound he made seemed to bring a quiet joy to the room. When they finished, he leaned back, exhausted but smiling. "I haven't felt that in years," he said. "Thank you." When she left that night, Lila felt something shift inside her again. She realized she wasn't just visiting to play for him anymore. She was helping him find a part of himself he thought he had lost. It was a small thing, but it mattered more than she could explain. As the weeks passed, their bond grew deeper. Sometimes other residents would gather near the doorway to listen to her play. The soft music would fill the halls, and for a few moments, the nursing home didn't feel like a place of endings. It felt like a place where memories came alive again. One evening, as she was packing up, Mr. Alden said quietly, "You remind me of my daughter." Lila froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. "Did she play too?" she asked. "She used to," he said, his voice distant, "but she moved away years ago. We don't talk much now. Life has its ways of pulling people apart." He paused, then added, "But when you play, it feels like she's in the room again." Lila's throat tightened. She didn't know his daughter, but she could hear the love and pain in his voice. "Maybe music finds its way back," she said softly, "even when people don't." That night, as she walked home, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. There was something so pure about the way he listened, not for perfection, but for emotion. It reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Winter slowly arrived, painting the town with cold winds and gray skies. But Lila's visits never stopped. She would walk through the snow, her breath turning into little clouds in the air, her keyboard tucked safely under her coat. And every time she entered that quiet room, the warmth returned, in his smile, in the soft light, in the sound of music filling the silence once more. One particularly cold evening, she arrived to find Mr. Alden looking weaker than usual. His hands trembled more and his voice was faint. "I'm tired today," he whispered. "That's all right," Lila said gently. "I'll play something soft. You can just listen." She began a lullaby she remembered from her childhood, one her mother used to hum when she couldn't sleep. As she played, she noticed tears forming in his eyes again, but this time he didn't hide them. When the song ended, he said quietly, "Thank you, my dear. You've given me back more than you know." Lila didn't fully understand what he meant at that moment. She just smiled and said, "I'll see you next week." He nodded weakly. "Next week," he repeated, his eyes filled with peace. When she left, she felt a strange heaviness she couldn't explain, like the air itself was whispering that something was changing. But she brushed the thought aside. That night, as snowflakes began to fall outside her window, she sat at her old upright piano, playing the same melody she always played for him. She didn't know it yet, but that tune, that simple act of kindness, was becoming something far greater than she could ever imagine. For now, she just played, lost in the notes, feeling that somewhere across town, an old man by a window might be hearing the music in his heart too. It had been more than 2 months since Lila first walked into the nursing home with her little keyboard. What had begun as a single visit to play a short melody had now turned into a quiet ritual between her and Mr. Alden. Every Friday evening, she would finish her work, pack her keyboard, and walk through the cool streets of the small town to the same brick building where he waited by the window. Winter had settled deep into the town now. The trees outside the nursing home were bare, their branches reaching toward the gray sky like thin fingers. The air smelled of snow, and the faint sound of a distant church bell echoed through the streets. As Lila walked, her breath came out in soft clouds. She carried a small thermos of tea, wrapped in a cloth for both of them to share after their music. It had become her little way of saying thank you. When she arrived, Clara greeted her at the door with her usual kind smile. "He's been awake since morning," she said. "He keeps checking the window waiting for you." Lila laughed softly. "I think I'm starting to be part of his schedule." Clara nodded. "He's been doing better lately. He talks more, eats more. The doctor says it's a good sign. I think your music has something to do with it. Lila didn't know what to say to that. She had never thought of herself as someone who could change anyone's life. She only knew that when she played for him, something inside her felt right. A sense of peace she rarely found anywhere else. When she entered Mr. Alden's room, he turned his head at once. He looked a little frailer than before, but his eyes still had that same gentle spark. On the small table beside him was a folded handkerchief, a half-finished crossword puzzle, and a cup of tea that had gone cold. "You're right on time," he said, smiling faintly. "Punctuality is a lost art these days." "I try my best," Lila replied, setting down her keyboard. "How are you feeling today?" "Better now that you're here," he said. "The days are long, you know. The nights even longer. But music makes them shorter." She smiled, then pulled a small folded paper from her pocket. "I brought you something," she said. "I wrote down the notes for that melody you liked. Maybe you can practice when I'm not here." He looked at the paper for a long moment, his hands trembling as he held it. "You really think I can still play?" "I know you can," she said softly. "And even if your hands don't move like they used to, your heart still remembers." He smiled again, his eyes glistening. "You talk like an old soul," he said. "You must have lived many lives before this one," she laughed. "Maybe. Or maybe I just spend too much time around people older than me." That evening, the air outside turned colder, and the wind rattled the window panes. Lila began to play a slow, haunting tune, one she had never played before. It was something she had composed herself a few years ago, when she was going through a hard time, trying to find her place in the world. The melody was gentle but carried an ache that only someone who had known loss could feel. As she played, she noticed Mr. Alden close his eyes, his lips moving as if whispering to someone unseen. When the last note faded, he stayed silent for a long time. Then he said softly, "That song. It feels like goodbye." Lila looked up, surprised. "Goodbye?" He nodded slowly. "Not a sad goodbye, the kind you say when you know you'll meet again." His words lingered in the air, heavy and tender at the same time. Lila didn't know how to respond. So she simply said, "It's not goodbye, not today." He smiled faintly. "You're right, not today." They sat quietly after that, sipping tea from her thermos and listening to the wind outside. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was warm, filled with understanding. Over the following weeks, their bond deepened. Lila began to learn more about the man behind the frail hands and tired eyes. He told her about his younger days when he and his wife had played in small cafes and community halls. He spoke about how she would hum softly before every performance, saying it helped her tune her heart before singing. Lila loved hearing about those days, and every time he spoke of his wife, his eyes would light up like someone remembering sunlight after a long winter. One evening, he asked her, "Do you ever perform for others? You have a gift, you know." Lila shook her head. "I used to when I was younger. But life got busy. I started teaching, and performing just faded away." "Music shouldn't fade," he said firmly. "It's meant to be shared. Promise me something. Promise you won't stop playing for people who need it." She hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." From that day, she began recording small pieces she played at the nursing home, uploading them online for people to hear. She didn't expect anyone to notice, but slowly, people began to comment. Strangers saying her music made them feel calm, that it reminded them of someone they loved. She never mentioned Mr. Alden in the videos, but in her heart, she knew every song she played was for him. As winter turned into spring, Mr. Alden's health began to waver. Some days he was bright and talkative, sharing stories and jokes. Other days he was quiet, lost in thought, his eyes tired. Lila noticed the change, but she didn't speak of it. Instead, she kept showing up week after week, rain or shine. One Friday, when she arrived, Clara met her at the door with a worried expression. "He had a rough night," she said softly. "The doctor says he's weaker than before, but he's been asking for you." Lila's heart tightened. She hurried down the hallway, her hands gripping the keyboard case. When she entered his room, she saw him lying in bed instead of sitting by the window. The blanket covered most of his small frame, and his breathing was slow, but when he saw her, a faint smile appeared on his face. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I came," she said, pulling up a chair beside him. "I promised, remember?" He nodded weakly. "I thought maybe today you could play that first melody again." The one that started it all. She smiled through the sting in her eyes. I think that's a good idea. She set up her keyboard beside the bed and began to play the same simple melody she had played the very first day they met. The sound was soft, almost fragile, as if it knew this moment was delicate. Mr. Alden's breathing slowed even more and his eyes closed. But his lips moved faintly, forming the shape of a word she could barely hear. Thank you. When she finished, she sat quietly for a long time, holding his hand. The room was filled with a silence so deep it felt sacred. After a while, he opened his eyes again. You've given me something I thought I lost, he said weakly. Music, kindness. They're not gone from the world. People just forget how powerful they are. You reminded me. Lila squeezed his hand gently. You reminded me too. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Then we're even. That night, when she left the nursing home, the sky was clear and full of stars. She stopped at the gate and looked up, letting the cold air brush against her face. She felt both heavy and light, as if the world had grown quieter but kinder. The next morning, she woke to a call from Clara. Her voice was calm but sad. He passed peacefully in his sleep last night, she said. He wasn't in pain. He had your music playing when it happened. Lila didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat tightened and her eyes filled with tears. Clara continued softly. He left something for you, a letter. You can pick it up when you're ready. The rest of the day moved slowly. Lila went through her lessons like a shadow, her fingers pressing the keys but her mind far away. That evening, she walked to the nursing home again. The air was still, and the scent of fresh flowers hung near the entrance. Clara handed her a small envelope with her name written on it in shaky handwriting. He wrote it last week, she said. He told me to give it to you when the time came. Lila took the envelope and sat on the bench outside. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, the handwriting uneven but clear. My dear music girl, you came into my life when I thought all the songs had ended. You reminded me that kindness still exists, that even the simplest melody can bring back what time tried to take away. You gave me peace. For that, I want to thank you in the only way I can, by passing my music to you. In my home, there is a piano, old but loved. It's yours now, play it. Keep it alive, and when you do, remember that somewhere, in another room beyond this world, an old man is still listening. With gratitude, Alden, by the time she finished reading, her tears had already fallen onto the paper. She pressed the letter to her chest, whispering softly, Thank you. That night, Lila didn't sleep. She sat by her window, the letter beside her, and played the same melody again on her old upright piano. The notes carried through the still air, soft and full of love. She imagined Mr. Alden sitting by his window somewhere beyond the stars, smiling as the music reached him once more. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing, his music, his kindness, his memory, would live on through every note she played. And as the final note faded into the quiet night, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. When she walked into the nursing home that morning, the air felt different. The hallway that usually carried the faint sound of laughter and light chatter was unusually quiet. She smiled politely at the nurse behind the counter, expecting the usual greeting, but the woman's eyes softened as soon as she saw her. That look alone made her heart sink. Before she could ask anything, the nurse gently said, He passed away early this morning. For a moment, she didn't move. The words felt heavy, almost unreal, like they were floating in slow motion in the space between them. Her mouth went dry and her hands, still holding her music folder, trembled slightly. The nurse stepped forward and placed a hand on her arm. He went peacefully, she whispered, in his sleep. Lila swallowed hard. The noise in the hallway seemed to fade, leaving only the faint hum of an old ceiling fan. She wanted to say something, anything, but all she could manage was a quiet nod. Her chest felt tight as she tried to process what she'd just heard. Mr. Alden had become more than just a man she played for. In the quiet moments of those Friday evenings, he had turned into a friend, a listener, and in some strange way a part of her own story. The thought that he was gone left a hollow space inside her that words couldn't fill. The nurse guided her to his room. The bed was neatly made, the window still open just a crack as it always had been. The piano she used to play on stood silently in the corner, a little dust gathering on its keys. The chair he used to sit in faced the same spot near the window where he liked to watch the sunset. On the table beside the bed lay a small vase of withered flowers and a music sheet that she had once brought him. Her handwriting was still visible in the corner, where she had scribbled the title of the melody. She reached for it, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the paper as if afraid it might crumble. For a long time she stood there, not speaking. She thought about the way his face had changed over the months, how he had gone from a quiet, withdrawn man to someone who smiled when she walked in. She remembered the sound of his faint laughter when she once missed a note, and how he had tried, with shaky hands, to press a single key just to feel the vibration again. Those memories came back like waves, one after another. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry loudly. Instead, she sat at the piano and gently pressed one key, a soft, almost broken note that filled the empty room. It was the same note she had started with the first day she played for him. Then she began to play the melody he loved most. The sound drifted through the quiet room, touching everything: the walls, the chair, the open window. A nurse standing outside paused for a moment, recognizing the tune. By the time she finished, tears were silently running down her face. After that day, she couldn't bring herself to visit for a while. She went back to her small apartment, leaving her piano untouched for weeks. The music sheets lay scattered on her desk, but every time she tried to play, her hands froze. It felt wrong, as if part of the music had been taken away with him. But life, as it always does, went on. Her students still came for lessons. Her neighbors still greeted her, and the days continued to move forward. Slowly, she began to find comfort again in the simple things: the morning sunlight through her window, the smell of fresh tea, and the laughter of the children she taught. Then one afternoon, while she was organizing her lesson books, she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, a young man stood there holding an envelope. "Are you Miss Lila?" he asked politely. She nodded. "I'm from the office of Mr. Alden's attorney," he said, handing her the envelope. "He left this for you." Her heart began to race as she took it. The envelope was cream-colored, slightly thick, and had her name written in shaky handwriting she immediately recognized. She thanked the man, closed the door slowly, and sat down by her table. For a moment she just stared at it. Finally, with trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a letter, and another smaller envelope sealed with a lawyer's stamp. She unfolded the letter first. The handwriting was unsteady but careful. "Dear Lila, if you are reading this, it means I have gone where music never stops. Thank you for sharing your kindness and your melodies with me. You reminded me of something I had long forgotten, that life can still be gentle even when it is near its end. I spent years surrounded by silence after my wife passed away. Your music broke that silence. You brought warmth into my last days, and for that I am deeply grateful. There's something I want you to have, not out of charity, but because I believe it belongs with you now. I hope it helps you continue what you do best, bringing life to others through music. With gratitude." And by the time she finished reading, her eyes were wet, and her hands were shaking. She pressed the letter to her chest, feeling the lump in her throat grow heavier. For a long time she just sat there, reading the words again and again as if afraid they might disappear. Then she opened the second envelope. Inside was an official document, a notice from the lawyer. The note explained that Mr. Alden had included her in his will. Her name appeared right there next to a short list of his few belongings. It said she would receive a sum of money he had saved and something else: his grand piano. At first she couldn't believe it. She whispered the words aloud to herself, almost in disbelief. The grand piano, the same one that had belonged to his wife, the one he had once said carried her memory in every note. Her eyes widened as she remembered his stories about it, how it had been in their home for over 50 years, how his wife had played it every evening until her last day. That piano was his heart. And now it was hers. She didn't know whether to cry or smile. It felt overwhelming. Too much kindness from someone she hadn't expected anything from. But deep inside, she also understood why he did it. He hadn't given her the piano for its value. He had given it to her because he trusted she would keep the music alive. The next day, she visited the lawyer's office to confirm everything. The staff was kind, treating her with the same quiet respect one reserves for someone stepping into a new chapter of life. They told her that Mr. Alden had left a note with his will saying, "Give it to the girl who made me remember what a song feels like." When the piano was finally delivered to her small apartment, she stood by the door as movers carefully brought it in. It was an elegant old Steinway, its wood slightly worn but still shining. The keys were smooth and familiar, though a few had small marks from years of use. As they set it down, the air seemed to change. The room, once small and quiet, now felt alive again. That evening, after everyone left, she sat in front of the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a long time. Then gently she played the same simple melody, the one that had started it all. The sound filled the room, warm and rich like a whisper from the past. It was as if Mr. Alden was sitting nearby, listening, smiling quietly. She played for hours, not thinking about the notes, just feeling them. It wasn't about sadness anymore. It was about connection. Every sound was a thank you, a memory, a promise. From that day, her music changed. She began teaching children from her neighborhood who couldn't afford lessons. Sometimes when one of them sat at the piano nervously, she would smile and say, "This piano has heard many stories. Don't be afraid. It's kind." The children didn't know about Mr. Alden, not yet, but they could feel something special when they touched the keys. The piano had a soul of its own now, shaped by both of them. One who had found peace and one who had found purpose. Every time she played, she thought about how a small act of kindness had turned into something so unexpected. She had only meant to brighten a stranger's day, but in return she had received a gift that carried more than music. It carried trust, memory, and gratitude. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit by the piano and read his letter again. The words never grew old. They reminded her that even the simplest moments, a melody, a smile, a gentle gesture, can stay in someone's heart long after you've left. And as she closed the letter and placed it back near the piano, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Mr. Alden." Then she played the melody once more, letting it echo through the quiet room, knowing it would always belong to both of them. When the piano arrived at her home, she could hardly believe it was real. The movers had placed it carefully near the window, where the afternoon sunlight gently touched the polished wood. The piano looked older than she remembered from the nursing home, its keys slightly yellowed, but it still carried a quiet grace. The moment she saw it, she felt her throat tighten. It was like seeing a part of him again, like a memory that had taken shape right inside her small living room. After the movers left, silence filled the room. She stood there staring at the piano for a long time. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glossy surface, and she felt tears pricking her eyes. She pulled out the wooden stool, the same one the movers had brought along with the piano, and sat down slowly. When her fingers touched the keys, a chill ran through her. They were smooth and slightly cool, and the weight of them felt familiar, comforting even. She took a deep breath and played the same melody she had played for him the first time they met. The room came alive with the soft sound echoing against the walls. As the notes flowed, she imagined him sitting by the window, just as he used to, listening quietly with that faint smile of his. It was almost as if he were there again, and for the first time since his passing, she didn't feel the emptiness. Instead, she felt peace. Over the next few days, the piano became part of her routine. She would wake up, make tea, and before even opening her curtains, she would sit down and play. Sometimes it was soft melodies. Sometimes it was simple tunes she made up as she went. Each note felt like a way of saying thank you, not just for the piano, but for what it had come to mean. The small sum of money Mr. Alden had left her wasn't large, but it was enough to ease her worries for a while. She didn't spend it carelessly. She used part of it to fix up her music studio, buying new chairs and instruments for her students. The rest she saved, knowing it had come from someone who valued kindness over wealth. The first time one of her students saw the piano, their eyes widened. "Miss Lila, it's beautiful," a little girl exclaimed, running her fingers along the smooth wooden edge. Lila smiled, her heart swelling with quiet pride. "It's very special," she said softly. "It once belonged to someone who loved music very much." The piano quickly became the heart of her studio. Every student who came in wanted to play it, to feel the deep, rich tone that seemed to hold a story in every note. Some of the children were shy at first, afraid to touch something so beautiful, but she always reassured them. "Don't be afraid," she would say with a gentle smile. "This piano has heard all kinds of music, happy, sad, nervous, and brave. It's here to listen. not to judge. As the weeks went by, her studio grew busier. Word spread around town about the kind piano teacher who taught children who couldn't afford lessons. Some parents offered to pay what they could. Others brought homemade food or helped her clean the studio. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about community, about sharing something that made people feel alive. One afternoon, after her last student had left, she sat at the piano and noticed something she hadn't before, a small engraved plate near the side of the instrument. It read, "For my love, Clara, where our hearts found a home in every note." Her fingers traced the letters slowly. She realized this must have been the dedication Mr. Alden had made for his wife long ago. The thought brought a tear to her eye. She whispered softly, "You both gave this piano so much love." That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about how love and kindness could travel through time, how something so simple, a melody, a visit, a few kind words, could connect lives in ways no one expected. She thought about the old man sitting in the nursing home silent for months and how her simple act of visiting had changed both of their lives. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Her little studio became a warm place filled with laughter and music. Some evenings, the children's parents would stay behind, listening while their sons and daughters played the piano. Lila noticed that the sound of the instrument brought people closer. Even strangers would sometimes stop outside the window just to listen. There was one boy in particular who reminded her of herself when she was younger. He was quiet, always sitting at the back, hesitant to play in front of others. His name was Theo. One day she encouraged him to come forward and try the piano. He shook his head, murmuring, "I'm not good enough." She knelt beside him and said, "Do you know what the man who owned this piano once told me? He said music isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest." The boy hesitated, then nodded slowly and took a seat. When he began to play, his hands trembled, but the sound that came out was soft and beautiful. Lila smiled through watery eyes. It felt like the piano itself was speaking again, encouraging another soul to open up. The more she watched her students grow, the more she realized how much her life had changed since that day she first visited the nursing home. Back then she had gone because she wanted to help someone. Now she understood that she had also been helped in return. Mr. Alden's kindness had given her a purpose far bigger than teaching. It had given her a chance to pass that kindness forward. One morning, while dusting the piano, she found an old key tucked inside a small compartment beneath the keyboard. It was taped to a yellowing envelope with faint handwriting that read, "Music Room." She was puzzled. She didn't remember seeing it before. She set it aside, thinking maybe it had been something Mr. Alden had forgotten. A few days later, curiosity got the better of her. She contacted the lawyer's office and asked if they knew anything about the key. The lawyer, an older gentleman, smiled when she mentioned it. "Ah, yes," he said. "That key belongs to the small practice room behind his old home. He used to call it Clara's room. It's been empty for years. I believe it's still in his family's estate, but no one uses it." He paused, then added, "I think he would have wanted you to see it." The next weekend, she took the train to the quiet part of town where Mr. Alden had lived. His house was small and surrounded by overgrown bushes, but it still carried a gentle charm. She unlocked the side door, her heart beating fast, and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The walls were lined with books, photographs, and music sheets. And there, in the corner of the room, was another upright piano, smaller than the grand one she had inherited but still lovely. Its lid was closed and a thin layer of dust covered it. She wiped it clean gently and sat down. There was a framed photograph above the piano, a young woman smiling, her hands resting on sheet music. She knew instantly that it must be Clara. For a long while she sat quietly staring at the photo. Then she opened the piano lid and pressed a key. It rang out, slightly out of tune but still beautiful. She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the room and organizing the scattered music sheets. It felt like she was breathing life back into something long forgotten. When she left, she locked the door and stood outside for a moment, looking at the small house bathed in soft sunlight. She whispered, "Thank you for trusting me with your music." From that day forward, she kept the key with her as a reminder, not just of Mr. Alden, but of the idea that kindness always finds its way back. Months later, during a small recital at her studio, she shared the story with her students and their families. She told them about the man who had once been silent, the melody that brought him back to life, and the piano that now carried that memory. The children listened wide-eyed, and the parents smiled warmly. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. When it was time to play, she sat at the piano and began the same simple tune she had played so many times before. But this time it sounded different, fuller, deeper, like it carried every story, every smile, every moment of kindness she had ever known. As she finished, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds, filled only with the soft sound of breathing. Then the applause came, warm and genuine. She smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. That night, when everyone had gone home, she sat alone in the quiet studio. The moonlight spilled through the window, touching the piano with a silvery glow. She placed her hand on the wood and whispered, "I hope you're proud, Mr. Alden. Your music lives on." She knew now that the inheritance wasn't just the piano or the money. It was something deeper, a lesson that kindness doesn't end when someone's gone. It echoes just like a melody, finding new hearts to rest in. And as long as she kept playing, that melody, his melody, would never fade. The years moved quietly, one after another, like pages turning in a book she didn't want to end. Her little music studio, once small and modest, had grown into something beautiful. The walls that used to echo with just her melodies were now filled with laughter, chatter, and the sound of children practicing the piano. The old grand piano sat proudly near the front window, its keys slightly worn from countless lessons and songs. Yet every time she touched them, the notes still felt alive, as if the spirit of the man who had once owned it was still sitting somewhere nearby, listening. She had named the studio Alden's Melody, though she didn't tell many people the story behind the name at first. It wasn't about fame or attention. It was about gratitude, a quiet way to honor someone who had changed her life through an act of kindness. Over the door, she placed a small wooden sign with a quote she had written herself. "Kindness is a song that never ends." She believed that deeply now. It wasn't just a phrase. It was the truth that had shaped her entire journey. Every morning she would arrive early, open the windows, and let the soft morning air fill the room. She would make tea, tune the piano if needed, and wait for her students to arrive. Most of them were children, but some were older adults who had always wanted to learn but never had the chance. The studio had become more than a place for music. It was a safe space for anyone who wanted to find peace. One of her students, a shy boy named Theo, had grown into a confident young pianist over the years. He would often stay after lessons to help her tidy up or ask questions about composing. One afternoon, as he packed his bag, he looked at the piano and said, "Miss, do you ever get tired of teaching?" She smiled and shook her head. "No, I don't think I ever could. Every student teaches me something too." He tilted his head curiously. "What did we teach you?" She paused, her hands resting gently on the piano keys. "You taught me that music doesn't belong to just one person. It's meant to be shared. Every time you play, the song keeps growing." Theo smiled, though he didn't fully understand her words yet. But one day she knew he would. In the evenings, when the studio was quiet again, she often stayed behind to play alone. Those moments were her favorite. The world outside seemed to fade away, and she could lose herself in the sound of the piano. Sometimes she played the same melody she had played for Mr. Alden so long ago, the one that had brought him peace during his final months. Other times she made up new ones, letting her heart lead her fingers. It had been many years since she received the piano, but she never stopped feeling thankful. The letter he had written her was still framed on the wall, slightly faded now but still clear. It hung beside an old photograph of him that one of the nurses had given her later. He was smiling faintly in the picture, sitting by the nursing home window. Every time she looked at it, she remembered the first day she had met him, how quiet and distant he had seemed, and how music had bridged that silence. She often thought about how different her life might have been if she hadn't answered that phone call from the nursing home. That one small yes had changed everything. It had led her not just to a new path, but to a new understanding of what kindness really means. She had learned that sometimes the things we give away, time, care, love, come back to us in ways we never expect. One rainy afternoon, a middle-aged woman visited her studio. She stood near the door for a moment, watching as Lila finished teaching a young girl how to play a lullaby. When the lesson ended, the woman stepped forward and introduced herself. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said softly, "but I believe you knew my grandfather. Mr. Alden. Lila froze for a second. The name carried a familiar warmth, one that instantly brought back a flood of memories. Yes, she said with a gentle smile. I did. He was a wonderful man. The woman smiled too. I thought so. I've heard stories about him all my life. I recently found your name in some of his old papers, and I wanted to see the piano he left you. Lila led her toward the grand piano. The woman ran her hand along its surface and smiled sadly. I used to sit beside him when I was little, she said. He would play a song that my grandmother loved. I haven't heard it since then, Lila nodded. Would you like me to play it for you? The woman's eyes glistened. You know the song? She nodded again and began to play, the same simple melody that had connected her and Mr. Alden years ago. The notes filled the room, gentle and soft, carrying a touch of nostalgia. The woman closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks as she listened. When the last note faded, she whispered, That was it. That's the one. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The rain tapped lightly against the window, and the sound of the piano still lingered in the air. Finally, the woman looked up and said, Thank you for keeping this part of him alive. I think he would be very happy to know his music still plays. After she left, Lila sat alone for a while, thinking about how the melody had traveled, from a husband to his wife, from an old man to a young teacher, and now to his granddaughter. It struck her that the piano wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a bridge, and between generations, between lives, between hearts. A few months later, something remarkable happened. A local newspaper wrote an article about her studio and the story behind it. They called it, The Woman Who Inherited a Melody. Soon, people from nearby towns began visiting to hear her students play or to share their own stories of how music had touched their lives. She never sought attention, but she accepted it humbly, always giving credit to the man who had once sat quietly by a window and listened. With the help of donations and volunteers, she expanded the studio into a small community center. It became a place where anyone, regardless of age or background, could learn music for free. Some days, elderly people came in to listen. Other days, young children filled the room with laughter and wrong notes that somehow sounded perfect. She loved every moment of it. During the center's first anniversary, she organized a small concert. The students played pieces they had practiced for weeks, their families watching proudly. When it was her turn to perform, she stepped up to the piano and said softly, This melody was the first song I ever played for someone who needed it. It taught me that music can heal, even when words can't. She began to play the same gentle tune once more, and as the notes echoed through the hall, she felt a sense of peace that was impossible to describe. The faces in the crowd blurred as her eyes filled with tears, but she kept playing. Each note carried the memory of her journey, the quiet nursing home, the kind old man, the letter, the piano, and the years that followed. When the song ended, there was silence, and the kind of silence that holds meaning. Then the room erupted in applause. She smiled through her tears, bowing slightly before standing up. The music center wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone whose life had been touched by kindness. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, she stayed behind to clean up. The lights were dim, and the hall smelled faintly of flowers from the bouquets left on the tables. She sat at the piano once more, her fingers resting on the keys. She whispered softly, We did it. It felt like she wasn't speaking to herself, but to the memory of Mr. Alden, to the man who had believed in the power of music even when he could no longer play. As she began to play again, she noticed something small, the engraved words on the piano, the ones dedicated to his wife. They seemed to shimmer faintly under the soft light, where our hearts found a home in every note. She smiled and whispered, Yes, they did. Years would continue to pass, and she would grow older, but the piano never lost its voice. Her students would grow up, move away, and start their own lives, yet many of them would return to visit, each carrying their own version of that melody. Some would bring their children to learn from her, continuing the circle that kindness had begun. And even when her hair turned silver and her hands trembled slightly, she would still sit at that piano and play. The notes might not be as strong as before, but the emotion behind them would never fade. Because for her, the piano wasn't just an inheritance. It was a reminder that one small act of compassion can ripple through time, touching hearts we may never meet. On quiet evenings, when the music center was empty, She would often sit by the window, watching the sunset just like he once had. Sometimes she could almost hear his voice faint and warm saying, "That melody. My wife used to play it." And she would smile, closing her eyes as she played one last time for the day. The melody filled the room soft and endless, carrying the memory of a friendship born from kindness. A melody that had no ending, only echoes. Because even after all those years, the music still lived on. And so did the kindness that had created it.